Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Punungbayan, and I'm so happy that you're able to join us this afternoon for our 30th anniversary celebration. We have so much to talk about today, but while we're waiting just a few moments, while people still join us, please go ahead and put your name in the chat, your gender pronouns, how you're doing today. We'd love to hear from you. Hi, Gervi, good to see you. Congratulations on your scholarship. We'll be hearing a little bit more from all of our scholars a little bit later. We have a debut of a new short film that we'll be showing, Healing and Humanity, by up-and-coming Bay Area filmmaker Kat Cole. So stay tuned for that. We'll be screening that in just 1 minute. So please, everyone, welcome, put your name and where you're coming from and how you're doing in the chat. Welcome, Mary. Great to have you. Congratulations on your scholarship. Graciela, yay, all our scholars are here. So great to see all of you. So we'll just give it a few more seconds. And again, my name is Chris Punungbayan. I'm the Executive Director of California ChangeLawyers, and I'm so happy to be with you this afternoon. All right, let's go ahead and get started with a short film by up-and-coming filmmaker Kat Cole called Healing and Humanity.
Being a lawyer in the criminal justice system can be challenging, and it can be hard to remain hopeful, knowing the amount of injustices and inequities that our clients are experiencing every day. As a lawyer, I have the ability to try to bring a little bit of humanity into a system that is so inhumane. That's really just my goal every day, just to connect with clients and remind them that there are folks on the outside who are thinking about them and that are working hard to ensure their safe journey home. The most impactful experience in terms of wanting to lawyer with a trauma-informed approach was definitely the death of my dad. My dad was kind of a larger-than-life personality. He was well known for his laugh. He was super adventurous. He'd always have us out biking, rafting, horseback riding, you name it. Through those experiences with him, I really learned that I could lean on nature and the beauty of the outdoors as a place of peace. When I was about to turn 19, he was in town visiting for my birthday. And one afternoon, he went to cross the street. The first car that reached the crosswalk stopped. So he started crossing, and the second car that came didn't and hit and killed him. The woman who hit him happened to be white, and my dad was black. The first news article that came out about the accident somehow managed to blame my dad for his own death. I had to pick up the phone and call the reporter, and who was also a white woman, and remind her that my dad was a human being. I wasn't able to just have the grieving, which was more than enough for anybody to deal with, but I was also dealing with the racism that our family was going through. Trauma-informed lawyering is about caring as much about the impact of the legal process on the client as I do about the process itself. Many of our clients want to work on themselves and engage in healing from the trauma that they experienced, from reckoning with the crime that they're convicted of. Prison doesn't always have those resources available. That's a huge part of why I'm grateful to be a part of Uncommon Law. I not only get to learn from the best parole attorneys in the state about the legal piece, but also about how to be a trauma-informed lawyer.
The people that we are representing are serving life sentences, and they're in California prisons. The kind of work we do is, well, it's unusual. We call it uncommon law for a lot of different reasons. The usual way we work with clients is to sit one-on-one with them in private setting within the prison, and we're asking them really intimate, personal, difficult, sometimes painful questions about their own childhood and upbringing, and families, and their lives before they came to prison, and their lives inside prison. And a lot of times we have to peel back layers of a type of armor they've built up to protect themselves from really traumatic histories. Typically, when someone who is serving a life sentence appears before the parole board, they have just about a 20% chance of being granted parole in California right now. Our clients enjoy about a 60% success rate.
Change Lawyers funding Uncommon Law means a lot because it shows that they also want to see us be able to move into the careers that we're passionate about and that we want to do so that we can see the change that we want to see in the world. My dream world would entail the humanity of every single person being recognized and lifted up. And we are more focused on the healing that needs to happen after harm than punishment. I am Maddie Flood, and I am a change lawyer.
Wow, that was amazing and powerful. Thank you, Maddie. The world needs more lawyers just like you. I want to thank you for sharing your story, and thank you, Uncommon Law, for your partnership with California Change Lawyers. We are fortunate that we get to see Maddie a little later on in the program. She will be joining our former United States Attorney General Loretta Lynch in a fireside chat. So at this time, how about a virtual round of applause for Maddie? Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eric Kasher. I am the president of California Change Lawyers, and I want to welcome you to our 30th anniversary celebration. I've been on the board as president for the past 2 years, and there's so much about this organization that gives me great pride. But mainly, it's because of lawyers like Maddie. Maddie gives me so much hope and confidence for the future of our profession, and it's because of leaders like Maddie serving as an inspiration for our next generation that I know that we're going to be in a good place. And I want to thank each of you for your continued support of Change Lawyers and for joining us in this journey. I have the great honor this afternoon to welcome and thank our event sponsors, our 2020 event sponsors. And I'd like to start with the Walt Disney Company, Sussman Godfrey LLP, Chevron Corporation, Kleinitz PC, Myers Nave, Heritage Bank of Commerce, Access Lex, Kazin McLean Partners Foundation, CalBar Affinity / New York Life, the San Francisco Giants, Zughauser Group, Marco Zambrano, and Reynolds Homes. So thank you all so much for your sponsorship and your support of Change Lawyers. We could not do this work without you. As I close out my term as board president, I wanted to just offer a few thoughts on this organization's 30 years of building a better justice system for all Californians. There are so many things that make me proud. I'm proud that this organization has supported and given scholarships to more than 1,200 students and young lawyers just like Maddie to help create a diverse pipeline within the legal profession. I'm proud of the countless nonprofit legal service providers that we have supported with our grants program and partnered with throughout the organization's life. And I'm also very proud of what we represent, standing without hesitation for racial justice, queer and trans justice, gender justice, and justice for all. There's an old saying that a rising tide lifts all boats. Well, California Change Lawyers works hard to raise the tide of justice for all. In particular, those in the African-American community, our indigenous brothers and sisters, people of color, those at the margins, and making sure that they all have equal access and justice under the law. Through our scholarships, our fellowships, our grants program, and policy advocacy, we work to make the legal system more fair and just. On behalf of California Change Lawyers, I want to thank you for your continued support and for joining us here this afternoon. And speaking of scholarships, I'd like to introduce you to our 2020 ChangeLawyers Scholars. These 25 brand new law students have recorded a very special message just for you.
I want to be a movement lawyer so that I can help support groups who are advocating for justice.
I don't want people to experience family separation.
I'd like to help youth who are pushed into the child welfare and juvenile justice system.
I want to use my degree to further immigrant children rights.
Pie in the sky kind of dream is to eventually become a judge.
My partner and I are planning on establishing our own nonprofit organization to bring quality legal services to immigrant communities in rural areas.
I would love to get into impact litigation. Our criminal justice system is committing some of the most grossest human rights violations of our time.
And when I think about just examining aspects of structural racism and racial disparities in both policing and incarceration, all of that derives from my own intersectional identities of being Black, being a man, and also being raised in poverty.
I came to this country when I was 14 years old. I came as an undocumented,
low-income, first-generation Latina.
I come from an indigenous habitat community where people have experienced a lot of racism, poverty.
Growing up, we had to choose between doing what was legal and doing what was necessary to survive. From a young age, I got to see for myself all the ways that the criminal justice system is very much a conveyor belt of harm.
A lot of my personal experience has very much been living and navigating a broken immigration legal system. My family and my own existence in this country is oftentimes unwanted, considered a threat.
I watched as the attorney took advantage of my family financially due to our unfamiliarity with the U.S. legal system.
It's really important for people who have been in marginalized positions, like myself and my family, to represent other people as opposed to being what is most commonly seen in law school, which is white folks, white males, privileged folks.
There's a huge gap on making sure that there's enough Latina attorneys or people of color that can represent our stories.
It's beautiful to have an accent because people can relate to you, as their advocate and be like, yeah, if she can do it, so can I.
I will be the first Bengali lawyer that I know. That's very meaningful to me for future generations to have that representation.
Our system, though, it's great and it's better than a lot of other systems in the country. It's biased. It perpetuates prejudice. There's still more work to be done, and I'm ready to do it.
I dream of liberation for all people of color and all low-income people.
I think the world will be a place where immigrants and migrant workers and refugees from around the world can find a place where they can thrive and not just be on survival mode.
I want to see the end of mass incarceration.
This country was built on Black and brown people, like their blood, their tears, their bones. I hope to live in a world where Black and brown people are treated like citizens and not like burdens.
As a woman, a Muslim, a child of immigrants, and a minority, I aspire to act as a voice for change.
All of us are going to be so much better off the sooner that we put an end to racism and white supremacy, xenophobia, homophobia, patriarchy, classism, and I think that we can build the future that we hope for. I am a change lawyer.
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 I'm a change lawyer.
I am a change lawyer.
Wow. I don't know about you, but I get the chills every time I watch that video. Can you imagine a future U.S. Supreme Court filled with these scholars? Can you imagine attorneys general, law firm partners, general counsel, executive directors who look like these students? Our scholars give me hope about our future. Speaking of attorneys general, AG Loretta Lynch is in the green room getting ready to talk to all of you in just a few minutes. But right now, the time has come for our scholarships ceremony. As we have done every year for the past 30 years, we will be presenting scholarships to incredibly deserving California law students. These 25 students' qualifications include their leadership potential, academic achievement, and demonstrated ability to overcome adversity. Congratulations to you. You are the next generation of legal changemakers. Terry Allen, UCLA School of Law, sponsored by Cox, Castle, and Nicholson. Marlenee Blas, Berkeley Law, sponsored by Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati Foundation. Alexis Buz, Berkeley Law, sponsored by Fenwick and West. Gervi Cadimas, University of San Diego School of Law, sponsored by Downey Brand. Aleyda Castro, UCLA School of Law, sponsored by Sidley Austin Foundation. Ya-Ting Chang, UC Hastings College of the Law, Apple Diversity Scholar, sponsored by Wilmer Hale. Mary Carmen de la O, UC Hastings College of the Law, sponsored by Kiesel, Young, and Logan. Laura Jessica del Castillo, UCLA School of Law, Apple Diversity Scholar, sponsored by Wilmer Hale. Talisha Faruk, UCLA School of Law, Intel Diversity Scholar, sponsored by Wilmer Hale. Harold Grigsby III, Harvard Law School, sponsored by Pillsbury, Winthrop, Shaw, Pittman. Jailene Gutierrez, UC Davis School of Law, UPS Diversity Scholar, sponsored by Morrison and Forrester. Sandra Guzman, UC Irvine School of Law, sponsored by Oric. Arabi Hassan, Harvard Law School, sponsored by Munger, Tolles, and Olson. Jacob Hernandez, UCLA School of Law, Roche and Genentech Diversity Scholar, sponsored by Wilmer Hale. Chantel Johnson, Berkeley Law, sponsored by Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati Foundation. Summer Brook Lawson, Loyola Law School, Uber Diversity Scholar, sponsored by Morrison and Forrester. Annie Liu, USC Gould School of Law, sponsored by LimNexus Foundation. Aris Mangasarian, USC Gould School of Law, sponsored by Southern California Edison. Roxana Martinez Lopez, Southwestern Law School, sponsored by Manat, Phelps, and Phillips. Gracie Maynetto, UC Hastings College of the Law, Intel Diversity Scholar, sponsored by Wilmer Hale. Katiuska Pimentel Vargas, University of San Francisco School of Law, sponsored by Pacific Gas and Electric. Janve Sobers, UCLA School of Law, sponsored by Morrison and Forrester Foundation. Jess Valenzuela, Harvard Law School, sponsored by Loeb and Loeb. Miriam Yarde, UC Hastings College of the Law, sponsored by Latham and Watkins. Jaden Zwick, UCLA School of Law, sponsored by Kleindienst. Congratulations again to all of our scholars. I want to give deep gratitude to all of our law firm and corporate sponsors for making these 25 scholarships possible. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. In many cases, our sponsors have been with us for over a decade. Thank you for being with us through thick and thin. Excuse me. I'd also like to acknowledge Google for their generous support for this event. Our event theme this year is Reclaim Your Power. We are lawyers of color, first-generation lawyers, women lawyers, lesbian, gay, bi, trans, non-binary lawyers. Can you imagine what this country would look like if we were in positions of power? It's time we took our seat at the head of the table. It's time we do the transformative work that will bring about the changes that we need now. It's time to fund the next generation. That's why I'd like to ask for your financial support today so that we can keep this work going. Please join our movement and make a donation to ChangeLawyers so that we can take our work to the next level. You can do so right now on your cell phone. Go ahead and text to the number 44321 and type in the word ChangeLawyers. Then click on the link that pops up and please give what you can. $10, $50, $100, $1,000. Believe me, we will put your hard-earned money to good work. Every donation will make a difference for us. And I'm so pleased to be able to announce that all donations this afternoon will be doubled thanks to an anonymous supporter of Change Lawyers. So in reality, your donation of $10 becomes $20, $50 becomes $100, $100 becomes $200, $1,000 becomes $2,000. You get the picture. This is a unique opportunity for you to double your impact. So please text to the number 44321 and type in the word Change Lawyers. If you have an iPhone, our platform integrates with Apple Pay, so it's very easy for you to make a difference today. I'll just give you all a moment to take time to pull out your phone and make a donation to Change Lawyers. We're so grateful for anything that you can contribute this afternoon. Today, you've already seen Maddie's story. You've met our 25 scholars. Please help us keep it going. And remember, your gift is going to be matched 100%. Alexis, thank you so much for your donation. We really appreciate your support at this time. You know, there's an old saying that in these challenging times where we're dealing with the pandemic in California, the wildfires, the racial reckoning, that we have to focus on the things that we can control, and we should let go of the things that we can't control. Well, I want to offer you today that one thing that we can't control is investing in the next generation of legal change makers. We have the power to build up the next generation. So please support in any way that you can today. Karina, thank you so much for your donation. We really appreciate it. All right, it's now time to transition to our awards ceremony. I am so privileged to be presenting our 2 awards this afternoon, the Next Gen Award and the Leadership Award. Our Next Gen awardee is Maddie Flood. Maddie is a 2020 Change Lawyers Fellow and a powerful new voice in the social justice movement. Maddie works at Uncommon Law as a parole attorney. Prior to joining Uncommon Law, Maddie practiced at Homeless Action Center. During law school, Maddie was a William H. Gates Public Service Law Scholar and served on the board of the Incarcerated Mothers Advocacy Project, supporting incarcerated women who are going through the dependency process. She was also a board member of the Black Law Students Association, and Maddie was admitted to the California State Bar in December 2019. Congratulations to you, Maddie.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you to Change Lawyers. It's such an honor to have my work and my career supported by you all. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Congratulations. It is now my honor to present our Leadership Award to Attorney General Loretta Lynch. One of the most highly accomplished public figures in America today, former Attorney General Loretta Lynch has been a leading progressive voice for more than 30 years. She is the first female Black Attorney General of the United States, appointed by President Barack Obama in 2015. AG Lynch has been instrumental in shaping the direction of the nation on a number of tough issues and is known for taking bold stances on criminal justice reform. She served as the head of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York twice under both President Clinton and President Obama. While leading the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York, she became known for the high-profile civil rights conviction of 2 Brooklyn police officers who brutally assaulted Haitian immigrant Abner Louima. Born in Greensboro, North Carolina, the daughter of a school librarian and 4th-generation Baptist minister, A.G. Lynch was inspired by stories about her grandfather, a sharecropper in the 1930s, who helped members of his community who had no recourse under the Jim Crow system. Congratulations on your Leadership Award, Attorney General Lynch.
Thank you, Chris, and I am so honored to have the award here with me today. Thank you so much for making that possible, and thank you so much for mentioning my family, which is the source of everything that I've been able to do.
I am so pleased to hand it over now to Maddie and Attorney General Lynch for our closing keynote conversation, which I just cannot wait any longer for. So Maddie, please take it away.
Thank you, Chris. And Madam Attorney General, it is such an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us.
Thank you for having me.
So we'll jump right in. You were the 83rd Attorney General of the United States from 2015 to 2017, and the first Black woman to ever hold the top position of a top attorney in the United States. When you were in law school, did you ever imagine rising to that role?
You know, I have to say, no, I can tell you unequivocally, I did not. And when I was in law school, like so many people of my generation, I came out of law school in 1984. Yes, that's how old I am. You know, there were just only a few paths that were open for almost any of us. You either went to a big law firm or you tried to get one of the very, very few public service positions that were open. But most people were on this path to clerk and go to law firms. And I initially wanted to do First Amendment law and communications law because it was always important to me to help people tell their stories. And I went to a law firm right out of law school here in New York on Wall Street and was able to do that kind of law, and then soon realized that, you know, it wasn't so much the place where I was practicing as what I was able to do. And after several years there, decided that I felt the pull of public service and ended up joining the U.S. Attorney's Office, where I really felt fortunate to be able to help witnesses and victims tell their story in a way that made a difference and had an impact on their lives. So I did not have the plan that saw my career going where it is. I'm so impressed by all of the young award recipients today and watching them in the video talk about their plans for the future and the views that they already have of the legal system, of the criminal justice system. They've identified some of the most pressing needs that we have today. So I'm just so impressed that so many of the young scholars that we're honoring today are already well on their path. But what I'll say is, you know, it's wonderful to have that plan. It is great. And everything that everyone mentioned doing is so worthy of your talents. It's so worthy of you investing your time and energy in that. But don't be afraid to be open to other things as well. You know, my path sounded conventional, and for a while, it really felt like it was. I was sitting in a law firm along with half my class, it felt like, and I really felt the need to do something more with my life, and took the leap and joined the U.S. Attorney's Office at a time when, you know, it wasn't always the most popular thing to do. And you know, you can just imagine it wasn't easy for my family to pay for law school for me. I still had significant debt. That's an issue I know for so many people today. And it wasn't the path that I think they envisioned, that a young lawyer who had come from a small town in North Carolina and whose grandfather was a sharecropper. They thought, oh, you're on this path and you have to stay on it. But never be afraid to step off the path that you think is yours when something else comes before you, when that thing touches you. And by doing that, I was able to learn and to grow in ways that I could never have imagined had I stayed in a firm. And I did go to the U.S. Attorney's Office and did start my career as a young prosecutor. And I will say that I did that 30 years ago this year. So we share an anniversary. And I share that with the organization. It's quite an honor to do that. And I learned early on that so much of the justice system is opaque to so many people. You know, it's a black box, not just for the people who are going through it as defendants, but their family members who don't understand what's happening to their relative. And then the victims. You know, I was able to work on a number of cases early on, the usual raft of, you know, sort of general crimes areas. But then I moved into working on cases involving violent crimes and gang activity. And, you know, you're very, very conscious of the impact that violence has, particularly on so many Black and brown communities. And I always viewed my role as a prosecutor as helping to protect those communities. And you do that by focusing on accountability. Yes, that's true, but also on making sure that people going through the system are treated with respect and dignity, because again, people see that as well, but also making sure that victims' needs are met and that they understand what's happening to them also, and that they feel like they're heard and they're listened to, as opposed to being assumed that they're also part of the problem just because of their zip code or their address. You know, people recognize, you have to recognize the different positions that people have in our very challenged communities, and the very real need for safety and security, but also safety and security in a way that respects individuals living in those communities. And that's always something that's been very important to me. You know, you mentioned the Luima case. That was certainly a case that brought that to the fore in terms of the assumptions people make about Black and brown people and the tragic consequences that we still see today arising from those assumptions.
And so you may not have had this particular plan to end up as the Attorney General, the first Black woman who was the Attorney General of the US, but were there certain choices, or do you think that there's a certain way of being that you've had just from a young age that sort of led you on this path?
Well, I will say that you know, the introduction mentioned my grandfather, and it is true. My grandfather was a minister, like my father, and really the four generations of men on my father's side of my family. And he did spend a lot of time thinking about justice, because there often wasn't justice. You know, 1930s, North Carolina, very rural area. This is, you know, Ernesto Miranda had not even been born at that time. You know, you think about the challenges we face today. There have been times when we didn't even have the delineated rights that we're still fighting for in terms of the case law. And so if you were Black and you got in trouble in those days, you didn't have any options. You know, there was no due process. There were no public defenders available to you. And so most people had to find a way to either resolve it behind the scenes, and if they couldn't, they would leave the area. And that's what my grandfather helped them to do. And I always thought, you know, there has to be a way to build into this system a way to protect people, even as they go through the system, but also as they live next to it. So I've always had that view, and I think that's important. I think you have to always have a focus on what your North Star is, for example. But again, you can't really plan to be the Attorney General of the United States. Certainly, you know, when I was coming out of law school or starting in the U.S. Attorney's Office, but I did always think that it wasn't so much the title that I would ultimately have as the impact that I wanted to have on people. And that's what I would say to all the young lawyers who are watching today, in particular the young scholars. You know, as you go forth on your path, try and have an impact, try and make a difference in the lives of people and in the world around you. And that's what will bring people looking to you when they need someone to advance that agenda or to create that change. And so a lot of it is taking that leap. You know, I took the leap and left Wall Street, and you know, a much more comfortable financially existence, certainly for sure. But you know, it was more important to me that I do something that resonated within myself. And when you follow that particular guide, you'll always be on the right path, no matter what your title ends up being. You can have just as much impact if the only thing after your name is a period. You absolutely can, as long as your focus is on advancing justice and opening up our system for everybody.
Yeah. Well, speaking of our system, we are in an incredibly challenging time. Our democratic system, I think, is being challenged in ways that we've maybe seen before, but are incredibly challenging right now. Yeah. We have our Supreme Court being questioned about whether it's truly a nonpartisan institution. We might have two people declaring the presidency on November 3rd, and yes, Congress is more polarized than ever. You yourself have even sort of experienced how partisan politics can impact the effectiveness of our government, with Mitch McConnell leading the Republicans to potentially delay your appointment back in 2015. And so I'm wondering whether you think our democratic institutions are strong enough to withstand this moment, and what your biggest concern is.
Sure. Sure. You know, I think you're so right to say that we're in an incredibly challenging time. I do not think that we have faced the societal and cultural fissures that we are seeing now since 50 years ago, you know, when the civil rights movement was flowering and people were literally dying in the streets over the basic right to vote. And now we're still struggling to make that a reality for everybody in this country. So, you know, you see that this is a constant struggle. And it is true that it is a very, very difficult time. And we look at every branch of government and we see the challenges there. You know, I think that the question of whether or not our democracy and our democratic norms are strong enough to withstand it, the answer to that lies with us. It lies within all of us because we are the ones who create the structures there. You know, we are the ones who place people in the halls of power, as we are seeing now with the current electoral cycle. And I hope that people are focusing not just on the top of the ticket, but on the ticket all the way down to the local levels, because so much of everyday life, so much of the everyday implementation of the criminal justice system resides in the hands of locally elected officials. So I really think that this is a test for all of us. It's a test for our country. And yeah, I do worry at times. You know, I worry that sometimes people don't realize that democracy really is a fragile thing, and that, you know, we are not immune to the struggles that we've seen other countries deal with. Although I think for a long time we thought that we were. We thought that we were invincible because the systems that we had built were sailing along so well for so long. I think we have to ask ourselves, though, were they really? Because yes, we had a very strong functioning government. We had a very strong functioning economy, but it had always locked out certain significant portions of our society. It had always pushed away a number of people who tried to gain entry either into politics, into the economy, into the housing market, for example. So, you know, we've always had these tensions. Now they have come to the surface. And so I think when we look at the response to what's going on today, I do think that we can come out of this stronger than before. But the reason why we can do that is because we are now all involved. You know, this is a very personal thing for so many people. When you talk about the criminal justice system, when you talk about the tragedy of our immigration policy in this country, there's just no other word for it. You know, when you think about the ways in which we still struggle for gender equity and the challenges that so many people are still facing along that. All that is there, but now that it is in the open, we have to keep pushing to resolve these issues. And the real secret is, Maddie, you can't let your foot off the gas. I will tell you that, you know, when I was the Attorney General, and it was a tremendous honor, I will have to say that it was such an honor to serve in the cabinet of the greatest president that we have ever had, in my view. And it was wonderful to travel the country and meet with people and talk to people about all the things that we were trying to do. But I will tell you that one of the most, I think, important messages of the Obama administration was that the strength of this country, you know, as wonderful as it is to have a friend in the White House and to have a great president, the strength in this country comes from the ground up. It comes from people working up and bringing their ideas up to be implemented by people who step into positions of power and can then make them reality. So many of the things that we worked on were inspired by groups like California ChangeLawyers, by groups like some of the ones who are sponsoring these young people for scholarships. You know, the ideas that we had about criminal justice reform and immigration reform came from groups that had spent years working in the trenches on those issues. So yes, our democracy is challenged, you know, and it's my hope that we can redeem it and that it will leave us stronger, but also more sympathetic and more empathetic to other struggling democracies around the globe. That we'll no longer have this arrogance, you know, that we have it right and we don't need to work on ourselves, because the work that we're doing now has always needed to be done. And we just cannot let our foot off the gas pedal. The backlash that we've seen over the last 4 years was building in the 8 years prior to that. Immediately after President Obama's election, forces began to gather together to thwart every legislative initiative that he had or that he would try and have. And we saw that happen. We saw that happen certainly over the last 6 years of the administration. And as I mentioned before, the tragedy of immigration policy was a casualty of that. We had a chance to make real inroads into not only a serious problem, but an issue that has really just frankly exposed one of the shames of this country. And the political process did not afford that. Well, we've kept working on that. We've kept refining those issues. We've seen tremendous tragedy over the last 4 years, but I think now we know what we need to do when power ultimately turns around again. And it's my hope that the political wheel will turn and we will have an opportunity to put into reality all the things that we've learned over the last 4 years.
And so I want to turn toward the federal courts, because that is an area that has been deeply impacted during this administration. The Trump administration has now appointed about a quarter of all federal judges. And so and the majority of those judges are white conservative men. And so I want to hear your thoughts about how we move forward given that context.
Sure. Look, that's a challenge. Look, that is definitely a challenge that we are all going to have to face and frankly live with for the remainder of this court cycle. But what I would note is that one of the reasons why I'm so glad to be with you on your anniversary is that an anniversary is a time to look back on all the things that have been accomplished and also to look back on the challenges that have been overcome. Because unfortunately, it has often been the case when you look back at the history of our country that the courts have not always been a safe haven for poor and marginalized and disenfranchised people. It is just a fact, and it should not be a source of pride, quite frankly, for our judiciary that is the case. So we look, I think, as to how did people manage those situations when they could not turn to the courts. So when they didn't have that backstop behind them. Well, first of all, they never gave up. They never gave up, and what you saw were groups like LDF, MALDEF, and other groups crafting impact litigation that would, when you knew you weren't going to win the main point, winning small points along the way that ultimately built up to major policy shifts. But also the focus has to shift, I think, to actual policy and to legislation. And we have to work on policy and legislation and craft it in a way that it can survive the challenges that we know it's going to come. These challenges have always been here. It is true that, as we all know, the decision in Shelby County v. Holder dealt a major blow to significant portions of the Voting Rights Act. But that case did not come out of nowhere. That case was the result of 30 years of planning after the passage of the Voting Rights Act itself and the search for a test case that would give conservative groups the ability to push back on what they thought was the worst part of the Voting Rights Act, the pre-clearance section of it. So people who are focused instead on opening up our society, opening up our economy, have to be as intentional about the cases that we bring and look for those test cases where we can begin to make changes and we can begin to shift the narrative. But again, we haven't always had a judiciary that was receptive to that. We haven't always had a Supreme Court that was receptive to that. We've had a Supreme Court that, prior to Brown versus Board of Education, upheld segregation in this country. And people then pushed on policy issues. They pushed on local laws. We also have to not forget the importance of our state systems as well, and making sure that we have an impact at our state legislative systems, at our municipal legislative systems, in crafting the policies and laws that create the America that's open for all of us, so that all of them will not ultimately be struck down. We also have to keep our eye on the judiciary, and as openings come, make sure that we have people prepared as well to step into those seats.
Thank you. Thank you for that hopeful reminder, because it can feel like an insurmountable challenge at times, but those are all really important reminders. So thank you for that. I want to turn now to another big reckoning we have within our country right now, which is our racial reckoning that we're experiencing. This past summer, we saw masses of people out in the streets protesting the unjust killing of Black folks in the United States. And
as a Black woman, these things are not surprising to me, but each and every single time I'm devastated by it. And so I'm wondering for you, how it felt when you learned the news about George Floyd.
It was a very painful time. It was so painful to see happening again what has been happening for generations in this country, until the modern age. I think we've come so far, but sometimes we have this illusion that just because it's the 21st century, we're somehow more sophisticated than people 200 years ago who were doing this exact same thing. And when I watched that video in particular, I had a number of thoughts. Most of them were just emotions of just this crushing sadness and this crushing pain, first of all, for Mr. Floyd. And certainly I think at the point where we saw him call out for his long deceased mother, he became every Black woman's child at that moment. And those of us who do have children felt that unique pain. And so then, of course, the pain for his family and how they felt. I think, during my time as Attorney General, I actually had the opportunity during my travels to deal with this issue a lot as well. And I tried to meet with the families of individuals who had been struck down by law enforcement violence. I wasn't able to meet with all of them, but when I was traveling in an area, if the case was open, I would try and meet with the family. I don't think that we really can underestimate the pain of actually seeing your loved one lose their life literally in front of you, to violent means, and to violent means at the hands of someone who's sworn to protect you and who represents the power of the state. It's an incredibly painful thing for the surviving members of the Floyd family, and to have to see it over and over again is very unique pain, and particularly for his children. And so I don't think that we really focus on that enough sometimes, and I hope that we can keep that in mind. I do think that the advent of watching Mr. Floyd's death on video, as well as all the other viral videos that we've seen over the past several years, quite frankly, has been to actually advance this dialogue. It is very similar in my mind to the civil rights movement of the 60s, when television was able to show the brutality that was unleashed on young marchers, the fire hoses and the police dogs and the beatings that people were enduring. And a lot of it was photographic evidence by courageous, mostly Black photographers, but some white photographers, but a lot of it was video evidence as well. And it did create a shift in perception on the part of the rest of America. And out of that tragedy, those tragedies of pain from the 60s, we were able to push through some incredibly important changes. And so, I just think that part of me wishes that we never had to see this again. But I do think that the advent of all of these viral videos has been to awaken people who, for whatever reason, because it wasn't part of their lived experience, or they just couldn't face the fact, that this is their country doing this, we're so tempted to brush off this kind of violence and say, oh, you must be exaggerating. Oh, it can't be that bad. I think we're all familiar with the kind of gaslighting that goes on when you talk about racial violence in this country, as well as gender violence in this country, the diminution of the pain of individuals who feel that, the relegating it to some sort of secondary issue. And then sometimes, even if the pain is acknowledged, what you get is sort of but you got to understand the other side. So we're never allowed to totally feel and deal with just the raw pain. We're always having to take other people's feelings into consideration. The terrible video that we saw makes it impossible to equivocate like that. And so, and that's why I think people took to the streets to protest this. We have seen for so many years also that as much as we focus on this issue around the killings of Black men, often the plight of women of color have not risen to the forefront. The violence that women suffer, domestic violence, as well as at the hands of the state, is often minimized. It's often pushed away, and we're not allowed to talk about that in a way that makes it clear that it's as important as the victimization that occurs to men of color as well. And so again, the tremendous loss of so many people, Breonna Taylor, but she wasn't the first and she won't be the last. I hope that people don't forget the name of Sandra Bland, who died in jail, but after an encounter with law enforcement that should never have gone the way that it went. And so many women and girls who just literally disappear in this country on a daily basis at the hands of violence, that we don't lift up their names and their pain as well. And so I think that when I saw the marchers and I saw people really reacting to this moment, that's when I thought, out of this tremendous tragedy, it is my hope that we can, in fact, make real change. I was tremendously heartened to see the protest movements expand, to be more diverse, to have people of all ages, all genders, all races there. And I was also tremendously glad to see the protesters continue to claim their narrative. What happens when we start protesting in this country, frankly, it happens whenever there's a mass gathering. You always have people on the fringes who will turn to violence. You will always have looters. If there's a blackout, you'll have looters. And so often, people try and take that experience, and use it to delegitimize the narrative of peaceful protest in this country. But in this instance, we saw protesters standing up and reclaiming that narrative and making it clear that they were marching in the name of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and that they were not part of those people who were trying to exploit the marches for violence, and making it clear. And so that, I thought, was a tremendously powerful moment. They were owning their voice and they were owning their narrative. We have to do more of that. But now is the time to keep pushing for real change. The protests, it's riots are the language of the unheard. Protests are the language of those who want this country to live up to its ideals. And so now we have to keep pushing to make that real. So you're right, this issue of racial violence has never gone away, because we've never dealt with the original sin in this country of slavery and all of the consequences that flow from that. And every 50 or 60 years, we have this kind of reckoning. And so now we have to honor all those individuals who lost their lives at this juncture and push forward with significant change. I'm heartened because I do see police reform becoming an issue now. I mean, I've been working on it for 20 years, and it's not rocket science. It is not rocket science what needs to be done in these times like this. And so I'm heartened to see it also take on a national level as well, because you're going to have some unifying standards here for what is and is not acceptable for our government to do to our citizens.
So what do you, based on your legacy, really, that you've tried to hold police accountable when they fail to uphold the laws that they are sworn to protect, starting with the U.S. Attorney's Office and with prosecuting the police who assaulted Abner Louima, all the way up until your first major action as Attorney General, being the investigation of the Baltimore Police Department after the death of Freddie Gray. And so you've done this work, you've been in it. And so when you talk about the change that we need to be pushing for, what systemic reforms do you think we really need to see?
So we need systemic reforms at the national level. I think we actually do have now an executive order that provides for the setting up of a national database of officers with disciplinary problems. I don't know if we're going to see that come into fruition under this administration. I'm hoping it's more than just performative, but that's one step. But there are bills in Congress now that have been put forward, by the CBC and others that list a number of things we need to do on a national level to make sure that there are national standards of what we expect from police officers. The challenge is policing is so local. It's like 18,000 police departments in this country. And so we have to make sure that if they're getting federal funding, they have to live up to these national standards. We have to, there's no reason to have neck restraints as an acceptable use of force. We've known for years that they are more problematic than effective. That they're not safe policing for officers. They're deadly to people who are caught up in them. And so there needs to be a ban on that. So there's a number of things out there. But what really needs to happen, Maddie, and what I've seen working on this issue for a number of years is you have to have community involvement. You have to have a community base that is focused on this issue, that is focused on the fact that your mayor will pick your police chief, right? And so you need to know who your mayor is and what are their views on policing and what kind of police department do they envision for your municipality. And if you, depending on what, and no matter what kind of police department you have, whether one that's responsive to the community or not, you need to make sure, people who care about this issue have to make sure that there's a group of community leaders who connect with that department and say, you know what, you serve us, and here are our expectations for you. Opening up that dialogue. You know, we never get anywhere on any issue without communication, and this issue is no different. Now, I actually have seen police departments transform themselves. I've seen significant changes made in police community relations on sort of a city by city level. But even if you get to a point where there is a connection and there is, frankly, a communication between police leadership and community leadership, such to the point that people have input into what kind of training do officers have? They have input, you know, into how are you patrolling our neighborhoods? They have visibility into policies, you know, into issues like, what does your use of force policy look like? Do you have body cameras? How do you deal with privacy issues? You know, the best police departments set up community liaison groups to talk about just those issues, knowing that when you first sit down, you're not going to agree on everything, and you may not agree on anything when you first sit down. But if you keep talking these issues through, you can find some common ground. You know, you can find a way. There also has to be a backstop. You know, what I always also saw was that there had to be someone who could come in and enforce the community's views, whether that was a district attorney or the federal government. There you get into the challenges of the statutes that we have, which is why it's so important that we have a community effort that we can build on there as well. There's always
Speaking of that community effort, I'm hoping that we get one last chance to just offer what we as attorneys can do as change lawyers, just to wrap us up.
Sure. Look, I've been tremendously honored to be a lawyer for all of my adult career. I would not do anything else. I would not be anything else. I've had a number of different positions in this role. And I think that we can all look to that as an example of many, many ways to impact the system. But first, I think we have to think about all those people who place their faith in the legal system, and they come to us and they give us their most challenging cases and their darkest moments, and they turn to us for help. So they inspire me every day. It's my hope that they will continue to inspire you. I think we need to use our collective efforts across platforms. We have to challenge our elected leaders. We have to become our elected leaders. We are seeing now a groundswell of young progressive candidates running for office like we've really never seen before. People of color, women of color, who are going to bring a new voice to the halls of power and are going to support the policies that keep marginalized people in mind. We have to also keep pushing the cases. As I talked about earlier, we have to look at the composition of the courts and see, you know, can we plan a litigative strategy to push this issue along, you know, so that in 4 or 5 cases we can get the changes that we need. And if we can't, what's our legislative strategy like? You know, what laws can we pass? And finally, how do we open up the halls of justice to everyone so that there's true access to justice, so that people have representation at some of the most challenging times of their lives? And it's a lot. I know it sounds like a big lift, but you know, all it takes is one lawyer deciding, I'm going to pick this issue and focusing their energies on that. And when that happens, we have made tremendous change in the past, and I truly believe we can continue to do so. This is the moment. We have to seize it.
Thank you, Attorney General Lynch. Thank you.
Wow, I am just so inspired and moved by your words, Attorney General Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, I couldn't take notes fast enough on what you were saying. Own your voice, control the narrative. We've never dealt with the original sin of this country, of slavery. And it's up to us as to whether or not our democracy will be strong enough to withstand these challenges. I think you really laid out for us the path forward. So thank you so much for your wisdom and for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
This concludes our Change Lawyers 30th anniversary program. On behalf of the board and staff, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to our donors and our supporters. And if you haven't had a chance to make a donation today, your opportunity is now 44321. Change Lawyers, make a donation, join the movement. Thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day.